Very good afternoon to you, and thank you so much for finding time to being with us today. It's just, I trust that you're having a good day, good morning, good evening, depending on where you're tuned in and watching us. And shortly, I just want us to look at the skyrocketing cost of living that is being experienced not just here in Africa, but indeed across the world, that has been necessitated with a couple of factors, and that includes the Ukraine war. And the effects in the Ukraine war leave policymakers with little room to maneuver, as we have been feeling the effects of this, from the increase in fuel prices to the increase that has necessitated the increase of basic commodities across sub-Saharan African countries. And now we find ourselves facing severe and a very exogenous shock that perhaps we were not really and truly prepared for. And I've said this is not just a matter of Africa. I think it's something that has affected countries across the world, and Russia's invasion of Ukraine has prompted a surge in food and fuel prices that threatens the region's economic outlook. This latest setback could not have come at a worse time, at the backdrop of just reeling from the effects of COVID-19 pandemic. And so as growth was starting to recover and policymakers were beginning to address the social and economic legacy of COVID-19 pandemic and other developmental challenges, the effects of the war has very deep consequences, eroding standards of living and aggravating microeconomic imbalances from within Africa and indeed across board. We now expect a growth to slow down. That is according to economists who have been looking at the projections across the continent. So the economic growth is supposed to slow down by up to maybe 3.8% this year from last year's better than expected to be 4.5%, according to the latest regional economic outlook. And let me just take a look at, like prices for food, which accounts for 40% of consumer spending in the region, are rising rapidly. Around 85% of regions' wheat supplies are imported. Higher fuel and fertilizer prices are also affect domestic food production. Together, these factors will disproportionately hurt the poor, especially in urban areas, and would increase food insecurity. And we've seen how that has affected, it's not just the fuel, also the fertilizers, and also the price of the grain that comes from Ukraine and Russia and other parts of the world, and that has not been able to be distributed, especially from those ones from Ukraine and Russia. And that has led to a shortage of food. And even countries like Uganda, which has been for a long time been food sufficient, we've seen it this time grappling with the issue of food insecurity, and so has many other countries across the world. And high oil prices will boost the import bill for the region's oil importers by about $19 billion US, worsening trade imbalances and raising transport and other consumer costs. Oil importing fragile states will be hit hardest, and we have seen that happen, with fiscal balances expected to deteriorate by around 0.8% of gross domestic product compared to October 2021 forecast, twice that of other oil importing countries. So we can see it has been a roller coaster, and the shock is set to make an already delicate fiscal balancing act more difficult, increasing development spending, mobilizing more tax revenues that we've seen. Perhaps our especially new government here in Kenya will have to deal with. They have to find ways of mobilizing more tax revenues and containing debt pressures. We have a huge debt here in the country, and so are other countries across Africa. So the governments must find a way to strike a balance between developing spending and tax revenues, and perhaps come with other ingenious ways of finding ways to have more taxes. And right now we see in the country the government removed the subsidies, so the cost of fuel has gone a little bit up, and also the taxes that has been imposed in the fuel, Kenyans have been, that has necessitated the high prices of oil. So perhaps that is something that the government has to look at. But also the government must, get more revenue. So how will the government mobilize the increase in tax revenue and not necessarily affect the consumers? I think that is a very delicate balance, and I don't know if it's even possible to achieve that. But these are things that now countries and governments have to grapple with across Africa. Development spending, mobilizing more tax revenues, and containing debt pressure. And like our debt ceiling moved for the last few years to a very high octane right now. So the government has to find ways to service the current debts, and I don't know if it can afford to commit to more debts, but that is something that we'll see. And I think, as I said, those are things that authorities across the continent and indeed across the world have to deal with, and especially the sub-Saharan African countries. According to the World Bank, the war in Ukraine has disrupted the markets and altered global patterns of trade, production and consumption in ways that will keep prices at historically high levels through the end of 2024. So this is not just a Kenyan problem. This is not just a Ugandan problem. This is not just a Tanzania problem. This is not just a Zimbabwe problem, because these are countries that we've seen, and even in South Africa and the rest of the countries across Africa and indeed across the world. So the World Bank is saying this: nobody should expect the prices to go any lower. Instead, you should expect historical high levels through the end of 2024 for the economy to truly stabilize across the world. And according to the World Food Programme, the predictions are that in West Africa alone, about 7 to 10 million additional people could become food insecure due to the war's implications. So all of these are based on the back of the war in Ukraine and also the COVID-19 pandemic. And even before the conflict started, the food insecurity predictions for West Africa were worrying. The region is facing a food and nutrition crisis in its third consecutive year, with 33.4 million people expected to be in need of food assistance this year alone. And that is just in West Africa. So if we just bring it down back here to East Africa, and you see in Kenya, we do have a couple of arid and semi-arid counties that right now a lot of Kenyans are facing starvation and the brink of a famine. Somalia, the cases there is just worrying. We've been seeing the reports from the United Nations, and a country like South Sudan and other countries, and even, like I said, Uganda, which has been food secure for a long time, is now in need of food assistance. So that tells you that things are not looking up. And as the World Bank warned, we have to brace ourselves until perhaps all of these factors are able to stabilize and cancel each other by the end of 2024. And cereal prices are soaring due to the war in Ukraine. I've mentioned that before, and this happens because Russia and Ukraine are among the world's largest exporters of cereals. So that's why we have this stalemate among the importing countries. There are also several African countries which are already feeling the effects of rising prices, Russia and Ukraine are the leading exporters of wheat, with a combined world market share of more than 25%. And that is according to statistics of 2019. And a prolonged period of fighting may have consequences for harvest. And I think when this war started, we never could have predicted that it will last as long as it has lasted, but it is going on for months now, and nothing is getting better. And access to ports and grain storage terminals, shipping and insurance costs, and the spring planting season has been affected. So that is why Russia's war with Ukraine has put food security in terms of supply and price at the top of the agenda of many countries in the Middle East and indeed in Africa, since the region represented, for example, in 2021, 70% of the Russian wheat exports. Without going or any further, Egypt imported $3.23 billion worth of wheat from Russia. You can see that. And Ukraine, more than 2/3 of its total wheat imports. Okay, and Libya, just to try to put some figures so that we can understand how important and or how critical or crucial this conflict really has affected the flow of especially the grains across countries. And Libya imports 43% of its total wheat consumption from Ukraine, and Kenya imports the equivalent of 75% of its wheat from Ukraine and Russia. 75%. And that's why the prices of wheat flour has gone up, and that means that any other byproduct of wheat has gone up, like bread and other pastries and other food items like pasta and others. For Russia, the main importing African countries are Egypt, with almost half of the imports, followed by Sudan, Nigeria, Tanzania, Algeria, Kenya, and South Africa. Ukraine also exported $2.9 billion worth of agricultural products to the African continent in 2020. About 48% was wheat, 31% was corn, and the rest included sunflower oil, barley, soybeans, fertilizer, 31% corn, and the rest included sunflower, barley, soybeans. And of course, the cost of fertilizer is also rising. The Kenyan agriculture minister then, I think still is, the new President William Ruto has not given us the lineup of his new ministers, and so stated in Parliament that Kenya buys most of its fertilizer from Russia and China, and that the ongoing war could skyrocket its price if subsidies are not granted to farmers. And I think that was said earlier in March. So I think that has since changed, as the new government has promised Kenyans that starting perhaps this week we will see the subsidized fertilizer available in the markets, and Kenyan farmers can buy, and just to in this planting season. And sub-Saharan African countries find themselves facing among very severe shocks from this Russian war. So there has been rising food insecurity, and this has been a challenge even outside of the war, and these are the factors that we have to deal with right now. But this has been a challenge for the sub-Saharan Africa, the food insecurity, and has been in the increase in the war, and this will persist if the war also continues. And I'm just looking at some information from the International Monetary Fund, and I'm just trying to get the statistics here for you. Economic forecast, sub-Saharan Africa, and how this is working. So in 2021, the projections for 2022 was, let me just take Kenya for instance. In 2021 was 7.2%, and in 2022 was 5.7%, and some of the countries restoring debt sustainability will require debt reprofiling or an outright restructuring of their public debt, because a lot of countries right now are not really able to service these debts. So this reality is just sinking in, and just goes to shows how bad things are. That is the IMF World Economic Outlook, and those were the projections. I don't know if the sub-Saharan Africa countries have been able to live up to some of those projections. So that is just what we have to deal with, and that has been the effect of the war. And as I mentioned there earlier, we now expect a growth to slow down to 3.8%. This according to the World Bank. And last year's this expectation was at 4.5%. So Higher oil prices will boost the import bill for the region's oil importers by about 19 billion US dollars, worsening trade imbalances and raising transport and other consumer costs. Oil importing fragile states will be hit hardest, and we've seen that in Kenya. The price of oil has gone up because the new government has really scraped off their subsidies. So that means the cost of transport is up, and the cost of consumer goods has already started going up already, and it was already up before that. And so we are feeling this, and the shock is set to make an already delicate fiscal balancing, as I said there earlier, a bit more difficult. So the African countries must work, and I think this has presented, especially just starting from the pandemic, and what we saw, the underbelly, especially of the African health sector, and how fragile really our economies are, was really exposed during this time. And perhaps I would think these are opportunities that has offered different governments across Africa time to reflect and to come up with ingenious ways and means to address some of these problems. Because if countries like Egypt and Israel can be food sufficient, and we know the kind of climate they have over there, there's no reason why Africa cannot be food sufficient. Why can't we not employ technology? Why can't we not use science to address the issue of food security? As we know, just relying on the weather as it is right now, the rains, is not enough. So we have to sit down and think about this very critically and see how can we find alternatives of some of these challenges that we are facing, especially when it comes to food security, because this is the main cry. This is the main challenge right now that a lot of countries are dealing with. If your people are not fed, nothing can really move, and this poses even a problem as far as national security is concerned. Before you know it, we've seen some protests in the streets, people protesting and demanding for food prices to come down, and protesting over the rising cost of living. But a lot of these situations perhaps might be beyond what the government can do, but I think we need to have a roadmap. We need to start coming up with plans as African countries, so that we find our ways and means in which we can address these problems locally and find alternative solutions, so that should there be such a problem like we saw with the pandemic, where all the countries that we thought were partners, all the countries that we normally run to, especially our leaders, when we are seeking medical treatment or specialized this or specialized that, the world was closed down. And for the first time, they didn't care about us. They cared about themselves and their people, and we saw a sense of nationalism raising up in a way that perhaps we did not expect to see. We were given vaccines when they felt their people were okay and were safe. That's when Africa was given the leftovers. So if that wasn't a wake-up call enough for our leadership in this continent, then I don't know what will ever make our leaders wake up, because they should see that when it comes to the thick of it, every person to their own. So if we continue being over reliant on the outsiders for our economies to move, for our countries to work efficiently, then I think that is very dangerous. And if we continue claiming independence as we are, because we are, then we have to act in ways that our people are secure, that guarantees safety. Might not be 100%, but in a way that we are self-reliant, in a way that truly captures and addresses the issue around Africa and our problems. So even as the world grapples with the high cost of living, Africa is in the thick of it, but it's not just us, but also it's just something that is happening across the world, and half of the region's low-income countries are already in or at high risk of distress. Things are bad. And like I said, the rising oil prices also present a direct fiscal cost for countries through fuel subsidies. The government has refused that because they're saying it's expensive. They can't keep, they can't keep paying for the fuel subsidy, especially in Kenya, the new government, because they're saying it's not sustainable, while inflation will make reducing these subsidies unpopular. We know immediately that was removed. We've seen the prices go up, and even for the people who were hoping that perhaps things will become better immediately, they're wondering what happened. The cost is supposed to go down, what happened? But perhaps a lot of them don't understand some of these things are just effects of some of these factors out there, and spending pressures will only increase as growth slows, while rising interest rates in advanced economies may make financing more costly and harder to obtain for some governments. So that is just in a nutshell of what is happening as far as the Africa economy and the rising cost of living is concerned. Hopefully you found something in there that was helpful. Thank you so much for watching. Enjoy the rest of your day. My name is Miriam Ogotu. Bye-bye.